Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 005.
Senate Bill 5 by Senators Rodriguez and Ginal and Representative High Lewis concerning wholesale importation of prescription pharmaceutical products from Canada for resale to Colorado residents in connection therewith making an appropriation.
Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move passage of Senate Bill 5 on third reading and final passage.
Is there further discussion? Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate the sponsors bringing this forward. You know, this is an interesting bill. We've heard support about this bill from literally every party every year for the last several. I'm going to be a no vote on Senate Bill 5 today, and not even because I hate the idea. If it was something that I thought would work, it's certainly popular. I want to say something like 70% of Americans think that it's a great idea. Candidly, colleagues, I just don't think it'll work. I think two things are going to happen. First of all, I think the federal government is not going to allow us to do this as a state, which, if there was no fiscal note attached, no problem. Why don't we just ask and find out? Secondly, I don't think pharmaceutical companies are as stupid as some of us might think that they are. You know, there's less than 50 million Canadians, I believe, 30, 40 million Canadians, smaller than many of our areas of the country here. If I kind of wonder how it's going to look if you're a pharmaceutical company and you're shipping medication to a country expecting to have a certain number of prescriptions filled, and all of a sudden the volume in that deal that you made with that country, all of a sudden you see the volume of prescriptions increase by, if only Colorado signs on board, 15%. If California comes on board, over doubling. Let's say the whole country we decide we're going to do this. So now we see, 360 million new Canadian prescribers of medications. Do we really think that the pharmaceutical companies are going to do nothing? That they're just simply going to look back and go, wow, I guess we made a bad deal negotiating with Canada. This is really going to hurt our bottom line this year. Or, colleagues, are those drug companies maybe going to consider changing the prices that they charge Canada? There's a reason why medications or any product are sold at different prices globally. And to think that we can somehow do an end around on this and gimmick the system, candidly, I'm just skeptical more than anything else. Last year, we ran a bill that required the federal government's approval just to allow us to sell catastrophic individual health insurance plans. That was a bipartisan, bicameral bill that I was on. And I felt guilty because it cost several $1,000s for us to commission the study to see if the federal government would approve this. And guess what happened? The federal government told our DOI, no, it's not going to happen. Wasted money. And that was a few $1,000s. Now, what we're talking about in this bill, if I understand the fiscal note correctly, and the sponsors or anybody else can certainly come and correct me, we're talking about millions of dollars. So those that are on JBC have talked to me about the fact that projections are smaller than they're supposed to be. And as a state, we might not have the money in the general fund that we originally thought we might have. And yet we're willing to bet millions of dollars on an experiment that may or may not get approval from the federal government. So you might ask, well, what are our alternatives? Why wouldn't you support at least trying? And my answer is, well, Vermont already passed this. So we don't need to wonder whether or not there's a good chance that the federal government approves this. All we have to do is wait. Hold on to our millions of dollars and wait for a short period of time to see what happens in Vermont. And if Vermont's program gets approved, then I could see supporting this, right? We already know that it's going to work. I think it's short-lived. I think we'll see prescription drug savings maybe for a year or two, but if pharmaceutical companies are, as I don't want to use the term stupid, asleep at the wheel maybe, like we think that they might be, that they're not tracking their global pricing, then our citizens get to take advantage of this. The other thing with this bill that we have to remember, colleagues, as we heard in committee, many of you might think, when I say you, the collective you, might think that what we're doing with this bill is saving money for our most vulnerable population, like those on Medicaid, those on Medicare. Well, we asked that question in committee, who does this benefit? Does this benefit people on Medicaid? And Healthcare Policy and Financing said no. People on Medicaid won't be able to take advantage. And if I understood them correctly, people on Medicare also wouldn't be able to take advantage of this program. This program, like Vermont's, only benefits commercial insurers, not people on Medicaid, not people on Medicare. And remember, if you make too much money to be on Medicaid, you've purchased an exchange policy in our state up to 250% of federal poverty level, you're also getting cost-sharing reductions for your prescription drugs that dramatically lower the cost already. So I would have liked to have seen a number of amendments in this, but it sounds like those were all rejected. I was disappointed to hear that even an amendment that would ensure that Coloradans are receiving safe drugs was rejected on the floor on Friday. But what, again, I would encourage the sponsors to consider is, can't we just hang on to our millions of precious taxpayer dollars to see what happens in the Vermont decision before we plow forward in a program that has never been approved in any other city or any other state? Do we really think that this is a good use of taxpayer funds? I would say no. So I urge a no vote on Senate Bill 5 unamended. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, there's a form I could support this bill in. There's a concept here I think that is all too missing right now in American economics, and that's the idea of free trade, both the appropriate and free flow of capital as well as labor. For a long time, my understanding is that was a pillar of the Republican Party. And so perhaps, Mr. President, if the rules permitted, I would offer a conceptual amendment to fix this bill. I have a feeling that's not in order. What could fix this bill is if we said, as Colorado has done before, it's a technical term in politics, but to give the middle finger to the FDA and the federal government and say, Colorado's going to do things our way. And we've done that, and I would argue that was the right thing to do with certain controlled substances. We could do that here. We could tell the FDA, you're not welcome in Colorado, we're going to do things our own way. One of the challenges we have with the FDA that I think every single person in this room would say is that the FDA and Big Pharma have far too much in common on how many of these decisions are made. And I would say consumers are hurt by that. The problem is, that's not what this bill does. Our bill doesn't say we're going to trust Colorado consumers to make these decisions and get government out of the way. In fact, what this says is we're going to take money from the people, we're going to take millions of dollars, and we're going to ask government to do a government study to petition the other government to see if government can solve this problem. Friends, government is the problem in the drug, in the prescription drug challenges we face right now, and no amount of further government meddling in this, I would posit, would solve it. We could solve it if we were serious. I think we could solve it in a bipartisan way. Sadly, I don't think spending millions of dollars that could be going to roads, that could be going to paying our teachers on something when we all know the outcome of this, just to get a talking point that I think feels good. I think it's right. I don't think it's the right way to do it when there's a way we could actually do this that I think a majority of Coloradans would truly be behind. I ask for your no vote on Senate Bill 5.
Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did hear this in committee also, and I did support it. And I'm going to be a yes vote on this bill. And I think my colleagues who just spoke are all absolutely correct in what they're saying. But I think we got a long ways to go on this. I think we have a opportunity here with modern day technology to make innovations on this that would actually reduce the drug prices of the people of the state, in this state as well as this country. I think it's time we need to move in a direction of we're kind of going into the unknown on a lot of this technology and whatnot, and we're definitely going into the unknown whether or not the waiver is accepted by the federal government. But I think if you have medications and drugs that are 5 times cheaper coming out of Canada, which actually are manufactured in the United States, I think there's merit to this, and I think this has several ways to go. By the time it gets to the House or through the committees in the House, I think there'll be a lot of innovative changes on this as far as amendments. But I do believe that there is merit to this, and I think we need to actually to take advantage of how we can decrease the cost of drugs for the people. And I had planned on having an amendment now, but after talking to both sponsors, they both rejected the idea. So I think what we'll do is we'll pick it up in the House and see if we can't make the changes we think are necessary there to make this more workable. But I do believe that if more states come on board, we shouldn't have to wait for Connecticut or Vermont or whatever state it was. But I think the movement in what we need to do in the future for medications such as this should be more unified throughout the country. But I will, at this point in time, I will be a yes vote. Thank you.
Members, just a gentle reminder that the senatorial custom is that if you wish to speak, that you should be down in the well area. I will be noticing if members are staying, but please, if you will consult with the majority leader or the minority leader so that from afar I don't recognize someone, but if you can make your way down to the well area so that I can call on you accordingly. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to echo the concerns of my colleague from Parker. General concerns about general economic concerns and observations that arbitrage will ultimately whittle away the short-term benefits of this bill. Also, if you remember, I ran an amendment on second reading related to protecting Colorado consumers from trans-shipped products. I'm not going to beleaguer the body into the particulars of that, but I think it's just important for me, it was important to have that protection considering the overall effort to, quote, make this work, as my colleague from Parker mentioned, in my mind will put pressure on the transship product issue. So again, I encourage a no vote on the bill. Thank you.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Members, thanks for your attention. I have 2 arguments against this bill. The first argument I would describe as the water always seeks its own level argument. It's the idea that it seems like a good idea, seems like a great idea, but as this begins to roll out, as it begins to happen, we're going to discover what was hoped to be saved, what was hoped to be passed along to the people in terms of savings on prescriptions will be a chimera. It will disappear. In fact, it won't necessarily happen. The second argument I would make in opposition to this bill could have been remedied. In our debate and discussion on seconds, there was an amendment offered by the good senator from Aurora that would have sought to address this issue of product safety. And quite frankly, when we're talking about the pharmaceuticals that we put into our bodies and we put into the bodies of our children and grandchildren, safety is really important. And the amendment simply would have said, even though the bill does say, fit for human consumption essentially, it simply says know what you're actually getting. The amendment said specifically each prescription pharmaceutical product that the supplier exports to the program for dispensation, dispensation, that sounds like a theological term quite frankly, but it is appropriate here, to Colorado residents is manufactured for consumption by Canadian residents and not diverted or otherwise sourced from any other market. And this is very important. This is meaningful, that the idea was it was a product that the citizens of Canada knew they had received it. It had been sourced specifically for them. It's not something that was being diverted from another market. Now, there's a lot of knockoffs that come into our economy. There's knockoffs on Louis Vuitton purses. But if you buy a Louis Vuitton purse that's not a Louis Vuitton purse, you're gonna survive. Probably not a big deal. There's knockoffs on all sorts of things throughout the economy. But a knockoff on a pharmaceutical that you're going to put into your child's system or your grandchild's system or your own system, not acceptable. This amendment, had it been accepted, would in fact have alleviated major elements of that concern. So based on these two arguments, a product safety question that still lingers with this bill as currently brought to us on third reading today, and the idea that what we think we're going to get is going to evaporate before our eyes under the forces of market forces, are two, I think, sound reasons for an objection to and a vote against this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Ginal.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise in strong support of Senate Bill 005, and I think there's been a lot of misconceptions out there. First of all, the fact that the federal government doesn't allow this, so why should we try until they start? Well, why shouldn't we try? Because no one else has come up with a better answer at this point, and it's innovative, it's state administered, and it is an importation program, but it isn't of every single drug that's out there. And I think that's where some of the misunderstanding is. It's not about generic drugs, it's not about biologics, it's not about drugs that are opioids or narcotics. It's about some of the most expensive prescription brand name drugs that are out in the market that people really need. And it doesn't matter if they're in a private insurance, if they're paying for their own, or however they're paying for these drugs. I think one of the misconceptions is that it's all drugs, when it could be 6, it could be 12, it could be 20 drugs. These are the drugs that are going to be the most cost savings to the people of Colorado. And they're not illicit drugs, they're not unsafe drugs, because most of them are made in the United States or in conjunction with a United States pharmaceutical company made in Canada. And we're buying them back from Canada. You know, we talk about this as being a bipartisan bill, and it really is if you look at the other states that are involved here. Colorado happens to be one state, but there are more than 6 other states that are going forth with a similar type of bill. And Florida, for example, is Republican-led. Utah, West Virginia, Oklahoma. In fact, we use Vermont, who has only used 16 drugs on their formulary, and asked for those. And that's what we're using it as an example. But when you look at it, there's a lot of these types of bills that are being brought forth that are led by Republicans. So I wanted to clear that up. The other point is that this is a program where the state is going to take on the responsibility to act as a wholesale importer. And in order to get that federal certification, all we have to do is 2 things, according to the federal Secretary of Health and Human Services. That is, that we need to pose no additional risk to the public's health and safety, And I guarantee you, with all the things that are in place, that's not going to happen. And there's a track and trace. And also, the result has to have a significant price reduction to the United States consumer and the United States patient. And if HICPUF can't put that program together and send it to the federal government, to Health and Human Services, which I have the utmost confidence that they will, if it gets rejected, it gets rejected. That's not up to the state of Colorado. That's up to the federal government. And again, we're not the only state doing this. The last thing I want to clarify is I'm hearing millions and millions of dollars we're putting into this. And I look at the fiscal note. Yes, it's $1 million, $1.3 million to set up this program that will be timely. I know Friday was kind of a crazy day for all of us, but I think you remember that I introduced the children and the families of hemophiliacs and people who had various rare blood disorders. And if you put this into perspective of the 2019-2020 fiscal year at $1.3 million to put this program together, if you had talked to those children and their families, there's a drug that they need, for a life-giving drug for hemophilia, and it's $300,000 to $600,000 per year for those children and those young adults to stay alive. Now, if I do my math correctly, at $1.3 million, 2.5 to 3 people with hemophilia would get a year's treatment from $1.3 million. And some of these other brands that are out on the market now are probably even more than that. So what I'm trying to say is that this $1.3 million may sound like a lot of money to all of us, but when you compare it to the price that someone has to pay for a brand name drug and might be able to get it for a third, 2/3 of that cost, this doesn't sound like a whole lot to try to make a plan to save money for people. I'm here to help the patients, and I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. And if it saves lives, and if this plan works, and it looks like it's going to work in some other states that are not democratically led states, I ask for your support for this bill. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 005 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? Senators Sonnenberg, Heisey, Marble, Hill, Cook, Lundin, Gardner, Woodward, Tate, Smallwood, Rankin, Priola, the Minority Leader, Scott. With a vote of 20 ayes, 14 noes, 0 absent, and 1 excused, Senate Bill 005 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Donovan, Bridges, Gonzalez, Lee, Pedersen, Danielson, Fields, Foote. Please add the president. Story.